The iron gate felt colder than it should on Christmas Eve. My parents handed my sister $5 million in front of 200 guests. Then told me to leave with one suitcase. I walked into the night with no car keys and my card frozen, and I had no place left to go. But some habits break hard. That was why I was still standing here, freezing in the December rain, my fingers wrapped around the iron bars. I was Sydney Morris, 29 years old, and until 3 days ago, a rising PR strategist in Manhattan. Now, I was just a woman with a damp wool coat and a suitcase full of clothes that no longer matched my circumstances. The warm, golden light spilling from the massive windows of the Greenwich estate felt like a deliberate insult. Inside, the sound of a string quartet, something soft and classical, drifted faintly over the cold air. My hand reached for the door handle of my decade-old Subaru, dented on the passenger side from a snowstorm incident a few years back. The car was my last legitimate possession, my paid-off achievement. I paid for it, I stammered internally, reaching for the keychain. Every payment for 5 years. The sound of footsteps crunched on the gravel behind me. My father, Preston Morris, was walking back down the drive. His hand shot through the bars of the gate and snatched the keys before I could close my fingers around them. Paid through the corporate leasing structure using pre-tax bonuses, Sydney. His voice was flat, business-like. It was the same tone he used when firing an executive who had missed their quarterly target. Technically, you signed over the title to the holding company 3 years ago for tax efficiency. Remember, you no longer work for us. You don't get the perks. He did not wait for a response. He simply turned his back and walked away, my car keys jingling in his palm like loose change. I stood there, gripping the handle of my small suitcase, watching the fading light reflect off his tailored suit as he climbed the front steps and disappeared into the warmth of the house without a backward glance. I should have moved then. I knew I should have moved. But some stupid, persistent part of me was still waiting for him to return, to correct the terrible, unbelievable mistake. 1 hour ago, I had walked through those gates, thinking I'd unpack my suitcase into my old room. I'd lost my PR job 3 days before Christmas when my company merged, and my entire department was sliced away. The severance was enough for maybe 2 months of rent in a decent place. But I needed time to figure out where I was going, what I was going to do. Instead, I walked straight into Kinsley's engagement party. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing in the foyer, 200 people in cocktail attire, watching my little sister show off her ring. I stood there, still damp from the subway, carrying my work satchel. Preston tapped his champagne glass for silence right there in the marble foyer. He announced that the family trust, all $55 million of it, had been transferred entirely to Kinsley. Sydney has demonstrated a consistent pattern of professional failure, he had said, his voice echoing across the marble floors for everyone to hear. This family rewards success, not mediocrity. I begged him. God. I hate remembering the way I begged. I asked if I could just stay for a few weeks, through the holidays, until I found a new position. I promised I would be quiet, stay out of the way, and help with anything. My mother, Genevieve, set down her wine glass with a sharp, final click. You are a burden, Sydney. We are not running a charity for failed adults. You need to leave. Tonight. The whole party went silent. 200 people watched me stand there with my purse still on my shoulder, my face burning with shame. I left through the side door. I grabbed the suitcase I had packed that morning, the one I thought I would unpack into my childhood dresser. Then, I walked to the front gate like the obedient daughter I was trained to be, because some habits are fatal, and they break too late. That was where I was now, shivering. The cold seeped down my spine in slow rivulets, as the freezing rain found every weak seam in my coat. I realized then, standing at that gate in the dark, that this was my fatal flaw. I was still waiting for them to turn back. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. My phone battery died in my pocket, killed by the cold. The house lights began to turn off one by one, winking out like stars at dawn. The dining room, the upstairs bedrooms. My mother's room went dark last. I imagined her pulling the curtains closed, smoothing the duvet, settling into bed without a single thought of her daughter, standing outside in the freezing rain. I gripped the handle of my suitcase. The metal was so cold it burned through my gloves, straight down to the bone. I turned away from the gate, away from the house, away from every Christmas morning and summer barbecue that had happened behind those walls. Portchester was 3 miles east. I started walking into the dark, not looking back once. If I looked back now, I might stand at that gate forever. The walk from the Greenwich estate to Portchester felt like crossing into a different country. My feet had gone numb somewhere around mile 2, and the freezing rain needled my face. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my ankles, where my wet flats had rubbed the skin raw. My suitcase wheels jammed constantly on chunks of ice and cracks in the pavement, forcing me to drag it like I was hauling a physical weight of failure behind me. Just after midnight, I passed a Motel 6. The neon sign flickered red and white, advertising a vacancy, and I thought, maybe this was where my luck would finally turn. I still had the emergency credit card tucked deep in my wallet. Preston had given it to me years ago, for true emergencies only. Getting locked out of your family home on Christmas Eve in freezing temperatures certainly qualified. The night clerk, a young man who looked half asleep, peered at me through bulletproof glass. I slid the card reader through the slot. I watched the machine process the charge for what felt like an hour, the green lights blinking with agonizing slowness. Then it beeped. Declined. My voice cracked. Could you try that again, please? He swiped it twice more. Same flat, final sound. Declined. He peered down at his screen, then looked up at me, his expression shifting from bored to suspicious. Says here the card was reported stolen. About 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes. That was right after Preston had taken my car keys. Right after he had walked back into the house and closed the door without a glance back. While I was walking into the freezing dark, he was inside, taking the time to report the emergency card as fraud. He didn't just abandon me, he was actively, maliciously sabotaging my survival. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing what little air I had left. I left the motel without another word. What could I say? The clerk was already reaching for his phone, likely debating whether to call the police on the soggy, suspicious woman trying to use stolen plastic. The only shelter I could find was a bus stop on the edge of town, 3 walls of scratched plexiglass and a metal bench. I collapsed onto it, feeling the cold seep through my soaking coat straight into my bones. My teeth began to chatter so violently, I tasted blood where I had bitten my cheek. That's when I heard a faint whimpering sound. A dog, maybe 40 pounds, tied to the metal post with a length of frayed rope. Its fur was matted and soaked through, and it was shaking worse than I was. Someone had abandoned it here, tied it up, and simply left. It mirrored my own situation perfectly. I dug through my purse, finding half a stale turkey and Swiss sandwich from 2 days ago, wrapped in wax paper. I crouched down and broke off pieces, holding them out on my palm. The dog took them gently, its tail giving a single, grateful thump against the concrete. "We match," I whispered, sharing the sandwich bite for bite. Both of us thrown away on Christmas Eve. When we finished, the dog pressed against my leg, and I wrapped my arm around it, stealing the small, fragile warmth we could give each other. It was a shared dignity in absolute ruin. That's when I noticed the elderly woman. She was sitting at the far end of the bench, tucked into the shadows. I hadn't seen her before, but now I could make out her shape. She was perhaps 70, wearing a thin house dress and wet bedroom slippers that had no business being outside in this weather. Her gray hair hung in wet strings around her face. "Cold night," she said. Her voice rattled like loose change in a tin can. "The worst." I pulled my coat tighter, but it was useless. The wool was completely soaked. "Nice coat," she said, shivering violently. "Warm." It was warm, I thought. 3 hours ago, it was warm. I looked at her thin frame, at her slippers, at the way her lips had gone blue at the edges. I stood up and slowly shrugged off the coat. It was the only thing of material value I had left, the only barrier between me and hypothermia. "Here," I said, draping it over her shoulders. She stared at me, then at the coat, as if I had just handed her $1 million. "You'll freeze. You'll freeze faster." I sat back down in just my blouse and slacks. And the cold hit me like a physical, sharp blow. The wind cut through the wet fabric, and I started shaking so hard my vision blurred. But watching the old woman pull the coat tight around herself, seeing a tiny flicker of color return to her face, made the cold feel a little less like dying. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15. I was starting to drift into that dangerous, sleepy feeling when the headlights cut through the rain. Black sport utility vehicles. 3 of them. Moving in a tight formation like a presidential motorcade. They pulled up to the bus stop with military precision, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, holding an umbrella. "Miss Morris." His voice was Irish, clipped, and completely out of place. "I'm Liam O'Connell. Miss Vance would like a word." The elderly woman stood up. She wasn't shaking anymore. She removed my coat, and underneath, she was wearing a perfectly dry, cashmere sweater. The wet slippers were gone, replaced by leather boots that must have been hidden under the bench. "Eleanor Vance," she said. She extended her hand, as if we were meeting at a country club, instead of a bus stop, where I had just nearly given myself hypothermia. "You passed." My brain stalled. "Passed what?" "The test," she said, gesturing to Liam, who smoothly ushered me toward the middle vehicle. "I have a talent for finding people who choose freezing over watching someone else suffer," Sitting on that bench was uncomfortable, Sydney, but necessary to see your true character close up. The car's heated interior felt like stepping into heaven. Someone immediately wrapped a thick blanket around my shoulders. Eleanor settled across from me, looking every inch the billionaire she clearly was. Liam handed me a manila folder. Your credit report, Ms. Morris. I opened it with shaking hands and found my signature on a loan guarantee. $500,000 to Morris Holdings, LLC. The date was 3 days ago. I never signed this. No. Eleanor said, her voice sharp. Your father forged it. He needed a personal guarantor for a commercial loan that was already underwater. He used you as the fall guy before he kicked you out. The words hit me like individual punches. Not just disinherited, but criminally liable. My father didn't just abandon me. He weaponized my very existence. Something shifted inside my chest then. Not sadness, but clarity, cold and sharp as the December wind. You're not just homeless, dear. Eleanor continued. You're facing $500,000 in fraudulent debt that could follow you for decades. Preston Morris isn't mean. He's a criminal who monetized his own daughter. She leaned forward. I'm offering you $215,000 a year to train under me. 9 months of hell. But at the end, you'll have the skills and resources to survive what he did to you. I should have felt desperate or overwhelmed with gratitude. Instead, I felt strategic. I needed power. I needed money, not to escape what Preston did, but to turn it right back at him. When do I start? Eleanor Vance smiled. Right now. The first boardroom humiliation happens in February. Eleanor Vance's private jet was not warm enough to thaw the cold that had settled in my soul. But the blanket and the hot tea were a start. The emotional chill, the stark clarity that my father was a criminal, was what kept me focused. He monetized his daughter. That thought burned away the last vestige of the hope that had kept me standing at the iron gate. The following morning, the 9 months of hell began. Eleanor did not believe in a soft start. My training began with a stack of textbooks on forensic accounting, construction management, and real estate law so tall it reached my chin. You have 3 months to master the basics, Eleanor said, setting the pile down on a gleaming table in my temporary apartment. After that, you'll shadow Liam on site inspections. You were a public relations executive. You know how to craft a narrative. Now you need to understand what you're selling. I spent March through May drowning in loan, bearing calculations and zoning ordinances. My apartment became a cave of highlighted pages and cold coffee. I learned to read blueprints in the dim light of 4 a.m. because that was the only quiet hour before Eleanor's driver arrived at 6. The first test of my new skills wasn't in the field, but in a downtown Manhattan boardroom. I was standing at the head of a marble conference table, presenting Eleanor's proposal for mixed-income housing in South Bronx. My throat closed as a developer in a gray suit cut me off mid-sentence. Who did you say you were again? He asked, leaning back in his chair with a dismissive smirk. Sydney Morris, Executive Director of. My hands were shaking as I gripped the presentation remote. Right. The trust fund kid, he sneered. Eleanor, with all due respect, this is a waste of our time. Send someone who actually knows construction. Eleanor didn't defend me. She simply gave a curt nod toward the door. I gathered my materials, my cheeks burning, while 12 powerful people watched me leave like a child dismissed from the adult table. In the elevator going down, Eleanor finally spoke. How did that feel? Humiliating, I admitted, the word tasting like ash. Good, she said, pressing the lobby button. Now you know what's at stake when you walk into the next one unprepared. Your Yale degree means nothing when you can't tell the difference between rebar and conduit. The site inspections were worse. Liam O'Connell, true to his word, met me at the construction site in Portchester with a hard hat and steel-toed boots. It was the same town where I had been found shivering at the bus stop. Keep up, Miss Morris, he said, and walked into the mud without looking back. I quickly learned that construction sites smelled like diesel fuel and wet concrete. I learned that contractors did not soften their language for women in pencil skirts. I learned that my former PR polish counted for absolutely nothing when I was standing in a hole trying to calculate drainage slope. Liam was demanding, never offering praise, only correction. If you're going to build, you have to know how the foundation settles, he told me one rainy afternoon, handing me a muddy clipboard. If you're going to fight your father, you have to know where his foundation is cracking. By June, my hands stopped looking like they belonged to someone who once got weekly manicures. The calluses formed slowly, earned through holding clipboards in the rain and climbing scaffold stairs in the summer heat. My internal conflict, the deep-seated belief that my worth was tied to the ease of inherited status, was being slowly eroded by physical effort and mental strain. I hated the mud, I hated the early mornings, but I loved the quiet, undeniable proof of my own competence. I was no longer begging for validation. I was building it. Eleanor assigned me Project Beacon in July. It was her affordable housing initiative, 20 units for single mothers transitioning out of shelters. The budget was tight, the timeline impossible. The location was a forgotten lot in Portchester that flooded every time it rained. Fix it, Eleanor commanded, and left me standing in ankle-deep water with a drainage problem and 3 contractors who wouldn't return my calls. I fixed it. Not because I was naturally gifted, but because failure now meant proving Preston right. It meant confirming his label of me as mediocre. I refused to let that happen. I spent August mastering pump systems and French drains. I negotiated with suppliers who tried to overcharge me until I showed them I had done my homework. I earned the respect of my crew by being the first one there every morning and the last one to leave. My rubber boots caked in the same clay that covered their work clothes. This felt like real, tangible value. Something my father's money could never buy. By September, we were ahead of schedule on Project Beacon. The foundation was poured. The framing was up, and the forgotten lot in Portchester was finally starting to look like a community. I stood in what would someday be someone's kitchen and felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't happiness, not exactly, but a deep, quiet sense of pride. Relief, certainly, that I hadn't failed yet. My value was no longer speculative, it was built into the walls around me. That was when Kinsley found me. I was inspecting the electrical rough on a Thursday afternoon when I heard the unmistakable clit of expensive heels on plywood. She picked her way across the construction site, like she was navigating a minefield. Her designer handbag tucked under her arm. Her phone was already out, recording, Sydney. Her voice had that artificial sweetness she always used right before she drew blood. Oh my God, is that really you? I was wearing muddy jeans and a flannel shirt. My hair was pulled back in a ponytail that hadn't seen a salon in 9 months. And my steel-toed boots were covered in red clay that wouldn't come off no matter how hard I scrubbed. She circled me, the phone camera held high. This is just so sad. My sister used to work in PR. And now she's literally digging ditches. She zoomed in on my boots, careful to capture the logo on her handbag in the foreground. The Morris legacy. Everyone. How embarrassing. I should have said something sharp, something immediate and defensive. But the old instinct kicked in, the one that had kept me quiet through years of her casual cruelty and Preston's judgment. I just stood there, still gripping my clipboard, while she got her footage. She posted the video before she even left the site. By the time I was back in my truck, my phone was exploding with notifications. The post had already been shared over 200 times among the Greenwich social circles. The comments rolled in like punches. She really fell from grace. Imagine losing everything and ending up here. This is what happens when you disappoint your family. I sat in the truck, with mud tracked across the floor mats, and felt the shame creep up my neck like a rash. This was exactly what Preston had predicted, what he had always claimed, that I would fail, that I was meant to be discarded. My phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance. I saw the post, she said, her tone level. I'm sorry. I'll figure out how to. I started, thinking I needed to apologize for the embarrassment. Come to my office. She interrupted. Now. I drove to Manhattan expecting to be fired, expecting Eleanor to see the public display of failure and cut her losses. Instead, I found her sitting at her desk with Liam, both of them studying Kinsley's Instagram on a large screen. This is actually perfect, Eleanor said, a hint of something dark and exciting touching her mouth. I must have looked confused, because Liam gave a faint, rare smirk. You're a PR executive, Sydney. So do PR. They were right. I had spent 5 years crafting narratives for corporate clients, turning scandals into success stories. I knew how to spin a story. More importantly, I knew exactly how to make Kinsley look like the villain she truly was. I spent that evening filming a response video. Not in my apartment, where the lighting was soft and forgiving, but back at the construction site, standing in the same mud where Kinsley had ambushed me. My boots were still dirty. My flannel was still wrinkled. But my voice was steady and calm. My sister is right, I said directly to the camera. I'm not in PR anymore. I'm building affordable housing for single mothers. 20 families who need a safe place to raise their children. I turned the camera to show the framed building behind me. The structure of Project Beacon, lit by temporary floodlights. This is Project Beacon. If you think helping people is embarrassing, then yes. I'm deeply embarrassed. But if you think building something that matters is worth your time, we're accepting donations. I posted it at 11 p.m. By morning, the tide had turned completely. The comments flooded in. But they were different now. People were calling Kinsley elitist and shallow. Someone created a side-by-side comparison of her designer handbag collection and my mud-covered boots with the caption, "Guess which Morris sister is actually working?" The donation page for Project Beacon crashed from the traffic. We raised $40,000 in 3 days. Eleanor found me on site the following Monday. "You see it now, don't you?" she asked. "See what?" "That her opinion has no power, unless you give it power," Eleanor said. "She couldn't destroy you. She could only prove how far you have already come." She was right. For the first time since that terrible Christmas Eve, I realized I was no longer waiting for my family's approval. I had Eleanor. I had Liam. I had a crew of contractors who respected me, because I had earned it, not because my last name used to mean something. Kinsley's post was supposed to destroy me, but instead, it just armed me. I had weaponized my shame, and I had won my first strategic battle. I was finishing my site inspection that afternoon when Liam pulled me aside near the construction trailer. His expression was dark. "We need to talk about your father." He handed me his tablet. On the screen was a grainy, but clear security photo from a Manhattan restaurant. Preston sitting across from a man in an expensive suit. Julian Thorne. "Quantum Energy Tech is the current name," Liam said quietly. "Thorne's fund is under federal investigation. Your father is trying to clear his debts with a miracle investment." I looked at the photo again. Preston was leaning forward, eager, desperate. The same look of entitlement he had when he snatched my car keys through the gate. "How long until it collapses?" I asked. 6 months, maybe less." I nodded slowly, watching the crew pack up their tools as the sun set. "Then we have time to prepare." Liam studied my face. "You're not going to warn him?" It was not a question. "No," I said. "I'm going to watch." The cold clarity I felt, the strategic certainty that I wouldn't warn Preston, settled deep in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger was hot and messy. This was the quiet, precise calculation of a surgeon, or perhaps a strategist reviewing a military offensive. I wasn't interested in retribution. I was interested in consequence. My parents handed my sister $5 million in front of 200 guests, then took my car keys and froze my card. I walked into the night with one suitcase and no place left to go. But now, I choose where they walk next. That day, Liam slid a manila folder across Eleanor Vance's mahogany desk like he was dealing cards at a poker table. The motion was smooth, practiced. I'd learned to read his tells over the past months. When he moved like that, slow and deliberate, he had found something that made him furious. "Quantum Energy Tech," he said. "Your father's been meeting with Julian Thorne twice a week for the past month." I flipped open the folder. Inside was a glossy investment prospectus, filled with photos of solar panels that probably existed only in a graphic designer's computer. The projected returns were ludicrous, designed to make any sober investor wary. "It's a Ponzi scheme," Eleanor stated from her chair by the window. It wasn't a question. "The FBI's been building a case for 8 months. They're waiting for Thorne to collect enough deposits to make the charges stick. Maybe another 6 to 8 weeks before they move." Liam tapped a page near the bottom. "The minimum investment requirement, $500,000. The exact amount Preston was already liable for on the loan, he had forged in my name, plus interest. The math was too clean to be a coincidence. He's desperate, I concluded, closing the folder. He thinks this is his way out. What could warn him? Eleanor suggested, though her voice carried no conviction. If we warn him, he'll know we've been watching. I countered. He'll scramble. He might even try to implicate me further in his debt. We need him to commit fully. We need him to feel safe enough to destroy himself. So we do nothing. Liam sounded skeptical. We create the conditions for him to destroy himself, I corrected. He just needs the right push. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. I was reviewing permit applications when my phone buzzed. A process server caught me leaving the construction site and handed me the papers with an apologetic shrug. I read them standing in the parking lot while cement dust settled on my boots. Morris Holdings, LLC versus Sidney Morris. Violation of a non-disclosure agreement. Damages sought $100,000. The NDA was from 6 years ago. A boilerplate document I had signed when Preston made me a junior analyst. I had organized files and made coffee for 18 months before he decided I wasn't executive material. The agreement was standard legal protection, nothing I had ever violated. This lawsuit was harassment, pure spite wrapped in legal letterhead. But it was also something else. I read between the lines and calculated the timing. Preston needed liquid cash for Thorne's scheme. The mansion was already leveraged, and banks wouldn't touch him after the forged loan scandal nearly went public. This lawsuit wasn't about justice, it was about extracting money from the only source he had left. His daughter's new salary. He needed exactly $100,000 to complete his buy-in with Thorne. I drove straight to Eleanor's estate. She read the complaint twice, her expression hardening. This is extortion, she said finally. It's desperation disguised as power. I sat across from her, my hands steady on my knees. He needs $100,000 to complete his buy-in with Thorne. The mansion equity gets him to $400,000. This lawsuit covers the gap. You want to settle? Eleanor didn't sound surprised. Immediately, I said. No negotiations. Full amount. Liam looked up from his laptop, where he had been researching the claims. That makes you look weak. Your father will think he can squeeze you anytime he needs cash. Good, I said, meeting his eyes. Let him think that. Understanding dawned across Eleanor's face. She set down the papers and leaned back in her chair. A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth, the kind you would see on a chess master who has just spotted checkmate in 6 moves. You're handing him the rope, she said. I'm handing him exactly enough rope. I pulled out my phone and started drafting an email to my lawyer. He thinks I'm paying because I'm terrified, because I know my place. But what I'm really doing is ensuring he has no excuse not to invest every penny he can scrape together. The trap was armed. I had merely provided the final, necessary piece of bait. The settlement conference happened in a gray corporate office that smelled faintly of old carpet and nervous attorneys. The atmosphere felt less like a legal dispute and more like a staged confrontation, perfectly orchestrated for Preston's benefit. Preston arrived with Genevieve and their lawyer, a tired-looking man who seemed to already regret his retainer agreement. They were dressed for battle, exuding an air of self-importance that I used to find intimidating. Preston was in his power suit, and Genevieve wore pearls that likely cost more than my monthly rent used to. I, by contrast, wore mud-stained work pants and a Project Beacon polo shirt. I'd come straight from the construction site without changing, ensuring the contrast between our two worlds was deliberate and undeniable. I was a builder, they were paper vultures. Preston's lawyer started with the usual posturing: violation of trust, damage to company reputation, the sanctity of binding agreements. He droned on about how my employment had been a gift, a privileged opportunity that I had allegedly betrayed. I let him talk for exactly 4 minutes, absorbing the venomous pride in Preston's posture across the table. Then I interrupted. "We'll pay the full amount today." The room went silent. Preston's lawyer blinked twice, like he was struggling to process the unexpected surrender. "You're not going to negotiate?" Preston sounded almost disappointed. He had clearly been gearing up for a lengthy, morale-crushing fight, probably complete with a whole prepared speech about family loyalty and respect. "No point," I said simply. I didn't offer excuses or explanations. I signed the settlement agreement without reading it. My own lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside me, but he had been briefed. He knew this was strategy, not surrender. "Transfer the funds this afternoon," I told him, standing up to leave. Genevieve was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and contempt. She had expected tears, maybe begging. Instead, I was checking my phone for messages from the site foreman. "Smart choice, Sydney." Preston's voice followed me to the door, laced with smug satisfaction. "Maybe you're finally learning how the world works." I paused, turning back. I let myself look directly at him for the first time since we sat down. My expression was calm, neutral. The face I had practiced in the mirror for situations exactly like this. The ultimate absence of emotion. "Sometimes the best move is no move at all," I said. His brow furrowed slightly. He didn't understand. That was fine. He would. Back in my car, I sat in the parking garage for a full minute before starting the engine. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. 10 months ago, I would have been crying right now, devastated by their contempt, crushed by this public humiliation. Instead, I felt nothing but cold, precise clarity. The act of giving them that money was the most powerful move I had ever made. I had bought their destruction. I texted Liam. "It's done. Money transfers in 3 hours. His response came immediately. "Thorne's office confirmed Preston has an appointment tomorrow morning. Wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." I allowed myself a small, internal smile. The pieces were moving exactly as predicted. Preston would get his settlement money by dinner. He would combine it with the high-interest hard money loan he had taken out against the Greenwich mansion last week. The one with the immediate foreclosure clause, buried deep in Section 14 of the contract. Liam had found that detail yesterday, highlighting it in yellow. By tomorrow night, Preston would have dumped everything. The house equity, the settlement money. Probably Genevieve's jewelry, if he could liquidate it fast enough. Into Julian Thorne's fraudulent investment fund. And in about 8 weeks, the Federal Bureau of Investigation would freeze every asset Thorne controlled. I pulled out of the parking garage into afternoon traffic. My phone buzzed with a text from Kinsley, posted to her social media story 10 minutes ago. Sister paid up without a fight. Guess she finally knows her place. Some people are born leaders, others are born followers. Family hierarchy. Know your worth. The post already had 3,000 likes. Comments were flooding in from Greenwich society, people I used to know. They thought they were watching my humiliation. They had no idea they were watching me hand my father the shovel he would use to bury himself. I had just handed them the shovel. All of them. And they were so eager to start digging, they couldn't see the ground crumbling beneath their feet. The trap was armed. Now, I just had to wait for it to spring. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November. A month after I had handed Preston that settlement check. I was reviewing architectural plans for Project Beacon's second phase when my assistant knocked softly on the door of my new office in the Vance Foundation headquarters. "Miss Morris, your family is in the lobby," she said quietly. "They don't have an appointment." I glanced at Liam, who was leaning against my office doorframe, reviewing a risk assessment report. His expression didn't change, but I caught the slight, infinitesimal lift of his eyebrow. We both knew what this meant. The final stage of the trap was sprung. "The FBI raided quantum energy tech this morning," he said, his voice low. "Confirmed Ponzi scheme. Assets frozen. Send them up." I told my assistant. I remained seated behind my large, mahogany desk when they entered. That was the first thing Preston noticed. I could see the shock register on his face, that I wasn't jumping up to greet him. Not rushing to offer coffee, not smoothing over the awkwardness with nervous, familiar chatter as I used to. They looked terrible. Preston's shirt was wrinkled, missing a button at the collar. Genevieve's makeup was smeared slightly under her eyes, and her composure had completely fractured. Kinsley's hair, usually flat, ironed to perfection, hung limp and unwashed. The trappings of their privileged world had already begun to decay. "Sydney." Preston's voice cracked on my name. He had lost the business, like composure he had used that last Christmas Eve. "We need to talk. Family business." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "Please sit down." They sat. I waited. I did not prompt them. I made them speak first. "There's been a misunderstanding with an investment." Preston started, his hands shaking visibly as he gripped the armrests of the expensive guest chair. "A temporary liquidity issue. The hard money loan on the house has an acceleration clause, and we need bridge financing. $3.5 million. Just for 30 days until we can restructure." I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. Then 10. Preston's jaw tightened. "We're family, Sydney," Genevieve added, her voice thin and reedy. "You have resources now. Eleanor Vance's resources. Surely the foundation can." "The Vance Foundation," I interrupted, my voice level, "is a charitable organization with a fiduciary duty to serve its mission. I cannot authorize personal loans to family members using donor funds." "Don't give me that corporate double talk," Preston snapped, some of his old authority surfacing, the edge in his voice that used to make me flinch. "You're the incoming chief executive officer. You have discretion. You could help us if you wanted to." Could I? I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. Walk me through the math, Dad. You took the $100,000 from our settlement and invested it with Julian Thorne. You also took out a hard money loan against the Greenwich house. What was the interest rate on that loan? His face went pale. He had not anticipated this. 18%. I continued, answering my own question. With an immediate foreclosure clause upon default. You put everything into quantum energy tech. And now the FBI has frozen those assets because Thorne was running a Ponzi scheme. How many house payments did you miss? We can fix this. Genevieve whispered, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. We just need time. You thought I settled that lawsuit because I was weak? I said, keeping my voice almost gentle, almost conversational. You thought I paid you that money because I was terrified of you. Because I knew my place. Kinsley's head snapped up. You did know your place. You paid up like. I gave you exactly enough rope to hang yourselves. I finished, the words coming out flat and factual. I knew you needed liquid cash for Thorne's scheme. The minimum buy-in was $100,000. You'd already leveraged everything else. I didn't push you off the cliff, Dad. I just stepped out of the way while you ran toward it. Preston surged to his feet, shouting. You set us up! You knew it was a scam. I suspected it was a scam. You're the one who did zero due diligence. You're the one who signed mortgage documents with predatory terms. You made every choice here. I paused, letting the weight of the next sentence fall entirely on him. I didn't forge your signature on anything. The last word was the final punch. We both knew I was referencing the $500,000 loan guarantee. This is extortion, Preston gasped, stumbling back into his chair. You manipulated us into? Into what? I asked. Making a bad investment. Taking out a risky loan. I didn't commit fraud. I just gave you money and watched you destroy yourselves with it. Genevieve was openly crying now. Please. We'll lose everything. The house is all we have. You have each other, I said. Isn't that what you told me? Family helps family. Kinsley pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. Her eyes darted around the room. She looked like a trapped animal trying to find a way out, hoping she could still control the narrative. I'm going live right now, she threatened, her thumb hovering over the social media app. I'm telling everyone what you're doing. Everyone will know you let your own family become homeless. Go ahead. I nodded toward her phone. She fumbled with the screen and propped it against a stack of files. The red light blinked on. Hey, guys. So I'm here in my sister's office. She's the new chief executive officer of this huge foundation. And she's refusing to help our family. Even though we're about to lose our house. She has millions of dollars and she won't. Liam stepped forward then and placed a manila folder on my desk. I opened it, though I already knew what was inside. Screenshots. Dozens of them. Kinsley's old social media posts about me. The construction site photo. Comments calling me pathetic, a failure, an embarrassment to the Morris name. And behind those, more screenshots. Direct messages from Kinsley to her friends, laughing about how they had bled Sydney dry with the lawsuit. How stupid I had been to pay up so easily. Your followers might be interested in some context. I said quietly. About how you spent the last year mocking me online. About how that settlement you celebrated was intended to fund a Ponzi scheme. Kinsley's face went white. She grabbed for her phone. But the damage was already done. The livestream was filling with comments. I saw them scrolling past on her screen before she killed the feed. Preston tried one last time. He didn't shout now. His voice was small, broken. You're my daughter. I was your daughter, I corrected. Christmas Eve. Outside the gate. That's when I stopped. We made mistakes, Genevieve whispered. Parents make mistakes. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose Kinsley. You chose the money. You chose to lock me out in freezing rain after forging my name on a loan document. Those weren't mistakes. Those were decisions. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Preston's shoulders sagged. All that arrogance, that absolute certainty that he was entitled to my help, crumbled into something pathetic and desperate. The foreclosure proceedings start in 72 hours, Liam said from the doorway. You should consult with a bankruptcy attorney. They left without another word. Preston couldn't even look at me. Genevieve stumbled, and Kinsley had to steady her. Through my office window, I watched them cross the parking lot to a dented sedan. Nothing like the Mercedes they used to drive. The reckoning was complete. Within hours of the confrontation in my office, Kinsley's social media exploded, not with sympathy, as she had hoped, but with rage. People dug up every cruel post she had ever made about me. Screenshots of her settlement celebration, circulated with hashtags about karma and schadenfreude. By evening, the Greenwich society groups were buzzing. The Morris family wasn't just broke. They were pariahs, their public cruelty having finally become their downfall. The house, the grand Greenwich estate I grew up in, foreclosed within a week. I didn't attend the auction. Liam sent me a photo, though the empty house, dark and cold, with a bank seizure notice posted prominently on the door. They scattered after that. Different cheap apartments in different towns. Kinsley moved in with a friend from college. Preston and Genevieve rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in Stamford, sleeping on a pull-out sofa because they couldn't afford furniture. I felt nothing when I heard these details. Not satisfaction. Not guilt. Just a vast, clean emptiness where my family used to live inside my chest. The decade of emotional turmoil, the yearning for approval, was finally gone, replaced by the quiet, solid knowledge of my own resilience. I had found my true worth in the mud of a construction site, not in the marble halls of a mansion. 1 year had passed since that night. The ballroom doors of the new Vance Foundation headquarters slid open with a whisper, revealing 200 guests in evening wear. It was the night of the Project Beacon grand opening gala. Christmas Eve. Exactly 1 year since I stood outside those iron gates with nothing but a suitcase and frozen fingers. I smoothed the charcoal silk of my dress, feeling the pleasant weight of Eleanor Vance's emerald pendant at my throat. It belonged to her mother. She had clasped it around my neck an hour ago, without ceremony, just a brief, firm squeeze of my shoulder that said more than words ever could about trust and succession. You've done something remarkable here, Sydney, Eleanor said, standing beside me as we surveyed the crowd. At 76, she was sharper than anyone half her age. 40 families housed, employment programs running, and you managed it under budget. You have built a foundation of character. Through the floor, to ceiling windows, I could see the completed housing complex. Lights glowed in every unit. Families were visible in snapshots through thin curtains. A woman stirring something on a stove. A man lifting a toddler overhead. Teenagers sprawled on a couch watching television. These were the people I had fought for. The single mothers I had worked alongside for 9 months, who taught me that dignity isn't inherited. It's built with your own hands in the mud. Liam O'Connell appeared at my elbow, his expression carefully neutral. We have a situation at the entrance. I knew before he said it. Some part of me had been waiting for this all night, waiting for the final, inevitable confrontation. The Morris family attempted to enter without invitations. Liam confirmed. They're claiming they're here to network with potential donors. His mouth tightened in distaste. Your father is wearing a suit that's seen better days. Your mother keeps adjusting her coat. Your sister is filming the whole thing. And I informed them they're on the permanent exclusion list. He handed me 3 vouchers, the paper crisp between my fingers. I offered them these. Soup kitchen, 3 blocks south. Open until 10. The only help Miss Morris is willing to offer. I took the vouchers, feeling their weight. Not much. Just enough. Eleanor touched my arm. You don't have to see them, Sydney. But I did. Some part of me needed to look through that glass one final time, to put a silent, definitive period on the sentence they had tried to write for me. I walked to the mezzanine overlook. The floor, to ceiling glass wall offered a perfect, silent view of the circular drive below. Separating the warmth of the gala from the freezing night outside. Preston stood under the portico lights. His shoulders hunched against the cold. Genevieve clutched her purse like it might fly away. Kinsley held her phone at arm's length, trying to get the building in frame, likely preparing some post about being wrongfully excluded. They looked small from up here. Ordinary. Just 3 people who had made bad choices and were living with the consequences. Preston saw me. He looked up, locking eyes with me through the thick, soundproof glass. His face shifted, and he pushed forward, but Liam stepped smoothly into his path. I watched my father's mouth move, saw him gesture emphatically. Then he pointed up at me, and his expression crumpled into something that might have been desperation, or might have been rage. It was hard to tell from this distance. His lips formed words I could read even through the glass. Your mother would want. I didn't turn away dramatically. I simply stepped back from the window, letting the heavy velvet curtains obscure his view of me. I turned toward the warmth and light. Toward the 200 people who chose to show up tonight because they believed in what we had built. Through the glass, I caught one last glimpse of Liam handing Preston the vouchers. I saw my father crumple them in his fist. I saw Genevieve pull her coat tighter as freezing rain began to fall. The same December storm that seemed to come every year like clockwork. They turned away into the cold night. Into the dark. Into whatever came next for people who mistake their children for automated teller machines. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel much of anything except the pleasant weight of Eleanor's necklace and the warmth of the room at my back. Miss Morris. One of the Project Beacon mothers approached with her daughter, a gap-toothed 6-year-old girl in a velvet dress. We wanted to thank you. Maya starts at her new school in January. I knelt down to the girl's level. This child would grow up in a warm home, because 40 people decided to build something better. You're going to do amazing things, Maya. Later, after the speeches and champagne toasts, I stood alone on the balcony with my glass. The housing complex spread below, every window glowing gold against the December dark. They took my keys. I built an empire. They wanted me frozen out. I learned to generate my own warmth. I raised the glass in my hand toward the complex. Toward Eleanor inside discussing expansion plans. Toward every single person who showed up tonight. Toward myself. Standing here on solid ground, I built with my own bleeding hands. The forgiveness I once craved was meaningless. The only thing that mattered was the strength I had earned. And that, finally, was enough.